welcome to Stationery Test Drive. Today we are going to be covering the Unipin Fine Liner. But first, I'm Samir.
This is Minjal.
And I'm Vishal. And before we go into the test drive itself, Samir, why don't you tell us a little about what you're up to?
I have actually been mostly concentrating on my paper craft. You can see me at Papernautic on Instagram and also papernautic.com. I recently finished a origami workshop on Instagram and I'm going to be putting out more work soon.
Minjal?
Well, Samir and I have actually been researching and designing and will be out with merchandise for Inky Memo very soon. So I've been neck deep in handling logistics for the same. So sourcing envelopes and going to the post office and those kind of things so that we can have these products delivered to you.
And I've been in the pre-production stage of a animated film. I don't know how long the film is, so I don't want to commit to it either being a short film or a long film. It'll be abstract, it'll be musical, hopefully. And you should see it in 2022 sometime. It's a big long gap, expected more to the end rather than the beginning. But it'll be there. So follow me on @allvishal on social media for updates for the same eventually.
So now let's get back to the Unipin Fine Liner, which is what we're covering today. Fine liners are now pretty much a ubiquitous part of every artist's toolbox because I guess they're just one of the most convenient kinds of pens that you can have, and the fact that you get them at these various nib sizes just makes them very convenient for anything from illustration to lettering to even technical drawing. So I think let's start with showing what we tested this out with.
So
Vishal?
Since I'm an illustrator, I went with an actual illustration. This is done with the Unipin 0.1 actually most of the time. Just to see the kind of range that you can get from one single pen. I know we have a couple of weights here, 0.8, 0.3, and these usually artists at least buy them in sets. I do as well. I use them in sets. So for thicker lines, I would usually use a 0.4 or a 0.8. But in this case, I use the 0.1 to show the range that you can get. You can get everything from very light lines, because if you're not familiar, these are like little tips. The tips are extremely fine. That's why they're called pin and fine liners. And they aren't really mathematical, are they, Samir? It's not like 0.1 is a 0.1 mm or something like that.
No, I think it's, I don't know the exact correlation, but I mean, it's not an exact measurement from what I understand.
So this is the 0.8 and it has a stubbier tip. So, but even with this, with the light application of pressure, you can get very thin lines all the way to extremely thick ones, and then you can go over them, which is what I do many times to get that finessed line weight. So this is just pure fine liner to get tone and texture and everything else. Samir, why don't you show us what you've done so that we can see what else you can do with the fine liner?
I think we can show both of these.
Yeah. Let's just show all of our work. That's the test drive part of Stationery Test Drive. So now 3 very different approaches. I don't know if most people would think that they're even made with the same implement, but they are. Minjal, you seem to have gone completely freehand with this. Unless you did the border in freehand, in which case you are an alien and I'm afraid of you.
Yeah, no. Maybe I'll get there someday, but no. A steel ruler was used. And I think the benefit of using the fine liner, and I read this, is that the metal cladding over here, the metal cladding really helps. So when you want to really use it against a ruler or go really hard with it, it's not really going to spoil the tip too much.
Right. And it's also not going to spill over onto the ruler, which is a problem that we often have with more brush-like implements like brush pens and even fountain pens. There's always some residue left on the ruler, and when you pull it away, it gets stuck on there. But we don't have that problem, and that neatness is one of the reasons fine liners are really useful for all sorts of things. Remember, people, we're artistic and calligraphers and all of that, but there are people who just use these every day. They are perfectly great things to just use for writing down stuff. And Samir, you have written down one very fine line. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, this was in the spirit of stationary test drive. This was very much purely a test. I just wanted to use a series of these pens. I think I used probably a 0.8, a 0.3 and a 0.1. And just kind of made a fairly abstract design and some lettering, because I think these kind of pens can be really nice for lettering. Just to see what kind of effects could be gotten with the range of sizes. So
I see you've got a very clean line here. There's not a lot of bleed here, which is something we all like when we're doing these sorts of very technical, accurate work.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I tried to have a variation between freehand curves, and of course these lines use a ruler again to get the straight line. But the other interesting thing is that you can, as you said, go over things to make them thicker, like in some of these areas. But if you're very careful with it, you can also just pull lines which kind of taper off like this, which is what I was trying as well. Most people use a fine liner to get very kind of technical lines which are all even and perfectly the same width across, but it's not like you can't do things which are a bit more varied.
Right. So we also like to talk about the different papers here, because papers actually form a crucial factor in how a line goes down. You've done it on copy paper, which is 60 GSM or 80 GSM. Very thin, very prone to, you wouldn't think of it as an artistic medium. But with the right complement, like a fine liner, which doesn't bleed as much, you can do some pretty nice work. This one that I've done is probably a 160 GSM toothy art paper. And Minjal, this one is, what is this? This nice smooth...
It is more than 80 GSM for sure.
Right. It's about, I'd say it's a 120. It's very nice. It almost looks like it's digitally printed to me here. It's got a nice, very clean line. So the paper, of course, affects everything. The weight, you used multiple weights. I used one. Minjal, you seem to
I used the 0.8.
Okay.
I've been seeing a lot of magazine covers, that are really abstract. I was going for something like that.
Right.
There is a technique called the one-line drawing.
Okay.
Which I believe very popular artists like Picasso and Van Gogh also kind of, made popular. So yes, these are not exactly, I had to lift my hand, but it was a good practice in trying to kind of, not lift my hand from the paper and try to get the shape.
And
all of it.
Do you think the fine liner helped in that regard? Because you're used to calligraphy pens, which have flowing fountain penning styles.
Actually, I found this very easy to control because the ink flow is very, very smooth. I could actually go back and forth, and like these you have to kind of go over it.
Right.
So there is obviously no smudging and there is no bleeding. So those kind of things make this pen actually fairly great for, sketching as well.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot of bad things to say about these pens because we all use them in our art and in our daily lives. But is there anything bad about these?
I don't think so. I mean, I know that in the US and in some parts of Europe, the Pigma Micron is kind of the fine liner that's the more popular one. I think growing up in India and parts of the Gulf and in Asia, these are actually very popular and easy to get.
Also economical.
Yeah.
But mostly just at least you can get them quite easily.
Yeah, you can get them pretty much, or a version of them you can get in most stationery stores. In maybe not every stationery store down the street, but
And I think one of the reasons why these are really quite popular is because they are waterproof, which you don't quite get in most felt pens and sketch pens that you would normally find.
Right.
So,
and Unipin, that's the brand name for just this pen, or is that because I can see here that it says Mitsubishi Pencil Company.
yeah, so Unipin is kind of a sub-brand of the Uniball brand, and this is all manufactured by the Mitsubishi Pencil Company. I think they're about 110 years old, and they were one of the early manufacturers of pencils in Japan. In fact, a lot of stationery brands in Japan started as pencil manufacturers, and they kind of diversified after that. The fine liner is kind of an interesting instrument because the felt tip pens that we now use are kind of a fairly recent development. It's started somewhere around the 1950s, but before we had fountain pens with the typical kind of nib that we're all used to seeing, pens that were very similar to this with a metal cylinder called the stylographic pens were kind of the first ink pens that were used, like late 1800s.
So this is an older design than what we think of as an old design, which is a pen,
right?
A fountain pen. So between the feather with a quill at the end,
and a proper fountain pen with a flared nib shape that we are now used to, there were the stylographic pens, which were similar to this but without the felt tip. So it would use just a kind of a metal pin to hold back a free flow of the ink, but it would have a similar metal cylinder at the end, and that's what was an ink pen for, let's say, 10 or 20 years before the fountain pen came into being.
And the felt tip is some kind of synthetic material, so it's hard, durable, and porous as well.
Right, and the felt tip, I think, took somewhere around 50 years after the development of the fountain, the free-flowing ink version of this to come about. Somewhere around the 50s, I think Pentel, again, another Japanese-based company, came up with the first thin nib felt pens, and then I guess people like Unipin and others took that on.
And these can get very thin, right? The one that is at the bottom of the range, or the finest, is 0.05.
Right, and that can be really like hair width kind of lines.
You can almost approach, like with the 0.1, if you really hold it lightly, you can almost get at that, but I have used a 0.05, and at its full pressure, it sort of produces a line like that, a very thin line. And I love them. I love all of them. But I think you actually came across a certain problem with your 0.1, right? Where the point of failure. Tell us about that.
So I've been using these for some general portrait work and artwork other than these tests a couple of months ago, and I was trying to do some stippling, and the thing I came across was that because of the very kind of tiny...
We should explain stippling to our audience. Stippling is when you create texture or value or laying down marks by pressing the pen.
Using dots like that. Now the problem with that is because the felt tip in these pens protrudes from the metal cylinder a very small amount. It may be 1 mm in most cases. As you keep doing this, you're
impacting the paper.
You run the danger of either messing up the nib and kind of flattening it out. But because these are fairly good quality and strong, what it did was actually push the felt back into the cylinder. So there came a point where I couldn't use the pen anymore because there wasn't a nib left.
Right. And I believe there are specific stippling pens now that have solved this problem by having a nib itself that kind of moves in and takes the pressure.
Which is quite interesting because that's kind of going back in time to what these pens started as. So right now you have an ink reservoir here, maybe something to slow down the ink here, like in a fountain pen, and then you have...
it's like a honeycomb almost.
Right, and then you have the actual cylinder of synthetic felt that carries the ink forward here. Now, in some of these, I assume there's nothing holding this back physically other than just the pressure of the cylinder here, the metal cylinder. Now, if you're saying that there's something that kind of makes it flexible where it kind of pushes it back out,
Right.
that's actually going back to the 1870s when the stylographic pens were first invented, where instead of the felt that you have here, you'd have a thin metal wire that went back and was held by a spring here at the back. So that when you pressed here onto the metal wire, ink would flow. So in some ways, the solution was there all along. It's just that it needed to be rediscovered.
And it's an unusual use case. I basically that's why yours failed. These are made for more linear work. I think maybe at some point we should look into getting and acquiring a stippling pen and seeing what that does.
Yeah, that would be an interesting experiment to try.
Right, I think we've tested our way through this pen to a fair degree. Like we said, we all use this pen a lot. We use versions of this. The Unipens are just I honestly really like the industrial design of this. I know people like the microns and there's the snowbirds and all of those, but I think this is a handsome pen. Don't you think, as graphic designers, as artistic people, as people who
absolutely.
like...
I mean, I've used the microns as well, and we will test those out at some point.
Yeah.
But there's just something extremely ubiquitous about this pen. Like, you can just carry it around as a normal pen and it doesn't attract any attention.
It has a nice industrial look to it. I love and this happens in a lot of pens, that they have the number of the gauge on it. So this is 08. But I love these details, like it's there on this ring, and then it says, in a very nice, very well screen printed, I think, thing. I know we go on about the use of stationery on this channel a lot, but I think appreciating the simple pleasures of
the design
itself, like this window, you can actually see through. We can't. It's quite close to show it on camera, but you can see through to the pen, which is in some ways completely superfluous because you've got all your various things. But I love the weight of it, the balance, the fact that the cap sits perfectly tight and gives you a really nice thing. It's all these little quality of life things that make this one of my favorite pens.
And you can't discount that beautiful sound.
Yeah. The experience of stationery is as important to us as the use of it. We have used it, we have experienced it. Anything else you want to add? Or
no, I think that's it for this one. We will be back with more tests soon, of course. But until then, Vishal, anything that you want to share?
No, just follow us on social media. I'm at All Vishal on most places. Minjal?
I'm on Minjal Kadakia.
I'm at Samir Bharadwaj and at Paper Nautic. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will be bringing out more of these. And leave your comments so that if there's something specific you want covered and we have access to it, we will definitely track it down and talk about them. We are at inkymemo.com, where we talk about the history and the stories behind stationery a lot. And please do sign up for our email newsletter, which is also found at inkymemo.com and in the links below. So I think that's about it for this time. We'll be back with more in a new episode sometime next week. And Vishal, what do you have to say to our followers?
Use those fine liners.